with Professor Robert Endress. He is from Imperial College London. He's going to introduce himself in a minute. Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Brees. It is the 30th of May, 2020. I'm about to do an interview with Professor Robert Endress. He is from Imperial College London. He's going to introduce himself in a minute. And just to explain, because I'm always transparent about how people got in touch with me, Robert Endress got in touch and said, I'm a professor for systems biology, that is the analysis and modelling of biological data. And I very much appreciate your YouTube videos. Thank you very much for that. On the corona crisis and the lockdown measures, finally a sensible voice. Well, I'm just hopefully here to interview people like yourself who want to come forward and share any information. So we had a chat, agreed to do this interview today. And so first of all, why have you got in touch with me? Well, now, first of all, tell us a little bit about who you are, your experience, and about your role at Imperial College London. And I may add that Imperial College London is ranked third behind Oxford and Cambridge. It's a very well-respected institution.
Yes, thank you, Anna, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So basically what I do is I come from a physics background, and like many other people, I moved towards biology to modeling biological data and to analyze data and to develop theories. And we basically, say ideas here said physics has to be very successful over hundreds of years to describe non-living matter. And now we try to do the similar thing for living matter. So we try to develop quantitative predictive theories and to understand how complex systems effectively work. And it gives a kind of a unique perspective as well towards biology, because you could come from different angles. You could develop very detailed models if you come from a more mathematical biology direction, and then you have many parameters, and it might be very, let's say, difficult to determine all these parameters and to make predictions. And then you come more from a physics perspective. You try to develop very minimalistic models.
So why did you say finally a sensible voice? What's your concerns, or what information do you want to pass on about this situation that we're in?
Here said we have a very one-sided reporting about the whole corona crisis and the very severe lockdown measures. And you hear always sort of the same kind of people and their opinions. So what I'm basically missing is, and I think there's very little controversial about it, I just basically want to promote that we have a more open dialogue. That, of course, now refers to science on the one hand, and then also, of course, at a more societal level, because, of course, the lockdowns affect many different aspects of life. And then we should look at the whole picture effectively. Of course, we have censorship right now. We have sort of limitations of our civil liberties. And, these things affect us all. And so we have to have a broader discussion about how things affect each other. There are news reports about so and so many million surgeries being delayed or canceled. I mean, these things have to be obviously factored in. I mean, there's nothing strange about it. So
2.4 billion pounds per day is the estimate economists have put on the lockdown measures. You're right. And there is another story, isn't there? The lockdown deaths. And if you look at the ONS figures, there's been a number of excess deaths. I think it's around the 50,000 mark this year, but only around the 33,000 mark. This was data from about 2 weeks ago. 33,000 were due to COVID-19, but the rest, they couldn't say. There may be a lot of deaths happening because of lockdown. And obviously, not just that, we've got issues of domestic abuse. Livelihoods are being destroyed. Businesses may not be able to recover. You're right. You don't feel that this conversation is balanced?
No, I don't feel it's balanced. I mean, I wake up in the morning and I look at the news. I mean, I do still look at BBC and so on. And of course, I want to see sort of what the mainstream thinks. But it's quite shocking, these sort of numbers of deaths. I mean, all of a sudden we're looking with a microscope at how many people die of this coronavirus. And we wouldn't do this with any other process, which is, of course, also creating risk. We don't talk about how many people die in car accidents and all kinds of other reasons. So we don't have counters for that. And if you look at the statistics, all of a sudden you realize, you've shown so many thousands of deaths of any kind of other process as well at the same time. And we don't look at this kind of stuff.
What you're saying, you work for Imperial College London. They've driven this data. They've driven this government lockdown. Professor Neil Ferguson's projections. Were you involved in that report at all? And are you
No, I don't know him at all. I mean, I mean, I can't really say anything against Neil Ferguson in that sense because I don't know him very well, or I don't know him at all personally. And all I know about him is this one paper from March, which was sent around and I guess it sort of affected public policy. But otherwise, I don't know him personally, and I'm sure he's a renowned scientist, so there's no question about it. I only know this one work, and I looked at this and I was a little bit surprised when it was sort of sent around or it was publicly available, and I looked at it and I was just surprised how it quickly said in the beginning already that it would be about it affected public policy and of the UK and of the United States and I think some other countries. But it was a very sort of one-sided sort of worst case scenario. And whenever you do modeling, you understand that there's no correct model and that you have to be very careful about, you have to basically play devil's advocate yourself and see all the sides in a paper, at least in the discussion. And that's what peer review is for. And in that sense, in that case, this wasn't a peer-reviewed paper. It was just a document which affected the policymaking, and there was no discussion about it.
Why then? Why did we just all base it all on Professor Neil Ferguson from Imperial College London? Why?
Yeah, I don't. Of course, I don't know what went into it. Of course, he was part of this SAGE governmental advisory board. And of course, there were many other people on this board. So I don't know to what degree he influenced it, but he contributed to it certainly. And but of course, it's also
I agree. What do you think about the difference? And I've noticed this is fascinating to me. Is the difference views from professors at Oxford, Cambridge, and Imperial College London? There's very different viewpoints, and it seems that Oxford are kind of more concerned about the models and the projections that have led to lockdown, and they are starting to question the science behind it a little bit more. What do you think about that? Have you been aware of this difference between different universities?
I mean, I don't know much about the Oxford team. I have been watching all this the German sort of media, and there are a lot of scientists, of course, internationally as well. I mean, there are many people in Germany, there are many people in the US as well. John Ioannidis, for instance, from Stanford, similarly, Michael Levitt from Stanford. And in Germany, there are a few people. So, of course, they all are more cautious, basically, in their predictions. I mean, they're sort of criticizing these lockdown measures, in particular, the lack of open discussion. I mean, we have to have an open discussion because, if you think of locking down an economy, 4 days of lockdown, this is already basically 1% of the GDP, the gross domestic product. And if you have 5 weeks of lockdown, this is already 10% roughly. And now we are sort of 2 months into the lockdown or more. So you can see how damaging this must be. So
absolutely. I mean, there have been articles. So, for example, in the Daily Mail, there was an article that said that this model has been criticised. Imperial College London statistical model claims to show transmission rates, predicts that the death toll will triple in the next 2 months, 288,000. But it's come under fire from experts for shoddy code and dubious methods. People have been coming forward. There are voices, like you say, all over the world. Are there more voices in Germany that are kind of calling for balance and questioning this decision? Is it more in Germany than in this country?
Yeah, I mean, for some reason, Germany seems to be sort of partially at the center of this whole debate. I mean, of course, it's a few weeks ahead of the UK. So that's one reason, of course, as well. And then there's maybe also more culture in Germany of demonstrating. So there are a lot of demonstrations, which, of course, is made hard now because of the lockdown measures. And you see these sort of ridiculous images of demonstrations where maybe only 50 people are approved to go to a demonstration. And, they're sort of, almost like, sort of outlined with a sort of tape and, you have to be here and then the other person has to be over there. And this is sort of how we demonstrate, and it looks like completely lost these people on a big empty field. And it sort of course, doesn't do the purpose of the demonstration. So
have those demonstrations come about because of these voices, these critical voices rising up through, medical professionals? And obviously I did a piece on my YouTube channel about how a group of medical professionals have got together in Germany, haven't they? And produced a report, which I've put together in a video. Is it because that voice is louder on media?
I mean, yeah, I don't know what the reason is. I mean, this is a problem is a little bit, you decide a little bit what kind of news you watch. So I follow essentially the UK news and also the German news and the American news. And so, but for this COVID-19 discussion, I have been following quite a bit the German news. So I just know a little bit more about it. I don't know exactly what is then going on in the UK. Of course, I know there are some debates and especially on the alternative media. So
this is what's so fascinating for me from a media perspective. This is what I've been focusing on. I mean, I was watching the BBC. I've got an Amazon Fire Stick, and I go the news, and the BBC will give a summary of the news in about a minute, and I'll keep an eye on that. And they said in the news, protesting has begun in Germany based on conspiracy theories on social media. That's what they actually said. And then the next day, they said the same thing in their headlines, but they said it's being fueled by politicians. So I'm seeing this kind of also conflict between the media and government. But you're right, what you watch will have an influence on how you view this situation of lockdown or herd immunity. So you're probably more likely, if you've been watching a lot of Germany media, to think that our approach now was too severe, we need to come out of lockdown. But if you're watching more BBC, and Sky News, for example, and some of the national newspapers, you may be more inclined to think, where I live, they're certainly not protesting. They've even asked for more lockdown. It's all based on the media, isn't it? It's based on the media that you watch.
I mean, if you, of course, watch BBC, I mean, I still watch these channels. Of course, I want to see what's sort of publicly going on. But it's, of course, a very, very sort of scaremongering, which is very unfortunate because when people come out of the lockdown, and they don't even want to go back to work, or they don't want to even send their kids to school, which is absurd in my opinion. So that's of course an issue.
But I feel very frustrated in that situation as well, that children aren't going to school, and there's no doubt about it, children are suffering. They are, and they're not socializing. And when they go back to school, there's concerns that this fear has been hyped up by the media, whipped up, so that there's going to be this fear. A lot of people won't even return to school when the schools are open. And when they do, they're going to have to social distance. There was a report on the BBC where a teacher said, if a 2-year-old cries, I can't cuddle the 2-year-old. Yeah. I mean, and this is why I have got so much passion for and focused on speaking to people like yourself to, like you say, give some kind of sensible, balanced voice here. And this is about looking at all the different expert opinions, isn't it? And that's clearly what you've done. But you're a professor from Imperial College London. Do you have any specific opinions on that projection where 500,000 people were going to die unless we introduced these measures? 250,000 would die if we didn't introduce social distancing measures. What do you think of that projection?
I mean, as I said in the beginning, when you do modeling, you have to be very careful, especially if you develop sort of models of exponential growth. Because in this case, if an exponential growing pandemic in the beginning at least, and of course at some point, the curve flattens off because there's sort of a finite number of people in, of course, and so on. But I mean, whenever you have this sort of sensitivity, while you can make a model which can describe the data which you might have of the exponential growth quite well, you might have a very good model even. It might fit the data perfectly. It might the line might sit perfectly on the scatter of the data, but these models are highly sensitive. So you have to make some sort of you have to always give uncertainty intervals, and you have to see how different sort of slight changes in parameters effectively affect the outcome. And there have been also some modeling studies where you can see very nicely that you have a model which perfectly describes the data to some degree, whatever is available at least. And then at some point, you try to predict if there's some maximum where things starting to flatten out again or declines, the numbers of deaths or the numbers of infections. And when you look at these models, even if you have artificial data without any noise, so perfect data effectively, you can simulate this. So you can fit the data very well what you have, but then you're still very weak in terms of making the prediction afterwards, because small changes in parameter values have a huge impact. So some of these small changes in parameters might lead to a flattening and decline of the curve, and other ones just basically lead to some flattening and then still exponential rise, just with a smaller sort of reproductive number or infection rate, in case you have now implemented some lockdown measures. So you can have all kinds of outcomes, and you should be careful, I guess, to to take the worst case scenario. I mean, you can do it, but then you should also give the best case scenario where things just turn off very quickly after a month later. So, I mean, you have to essentially, it's sort of almost like a chaotic system, highly sensitive to the details and the parameter noise, the noise in the data and the parameter values. And this was what I missed in this early paper by Neil Ferguson. But, as I said, I'm sure there are other papers he wrote where he did this. I don't know why it is like said in this particular paper. In particular, it states very early on that it was used to implement or to influence policy making. So that's of course slightly strange, but so these models have these limitations, and one has to be very careful about them.
I think everyone who's done any reading is aware of that, and that's why so many people I know, citizens, just normal people, on social media contacting me and poring over this data themselves, and they're looking at death rates and trying to work out.
Exactly. I mean, very early on as well, as I looked, I mean, I saw these initial numbers and how the sort of media and also sort of say general thinking went into this one direction of lockdown and severe measures. I looked also at some data, and I also looked at some data from the Public Health of England, just sort of get some perspective effectively, what is happening elsewhere in England around this time. And you see these very interesting, oscillatory curves, which describes the death over the years in terms of just as a function of season or time in a year. And you see these seasonal up and downs, and every winter it goes up, of course, the death rate. During a flu season, 20 to 30,000 deaths. So, there's these huge numbers out there, and one should then also, consider what else is going on and put it in relation to these things. Of course, I'm not trying to play down, say, COVID-19, but one has to be careful, but one has to, of course, have this measured perspective. Of course, if you now, claim some sort of make a remarkable claims that we have 500,000 deaths, then sort of the burden of evidence is on you. You have to provide this evidence. If you make a claim, then you have to back it up even sort of 10 times. And the more specific and more extreme the claim is, if you sort of start comparing it like in the paper with Ebola and the Spanish flu, then you have to, of course, have to provide lots of evidence that this is a good prediction of your model. So this is on you basically to do that.
Of course, and so, for example, in my life, a neighbour's daughter has been very ill with coronavirus, and I've just found out a mum who's pregnant in third trimester is very ill. So I'm seeing it in real life. So what it does, it is happening, but it's balancing, getting that balance of opinions about the risks, because there are obviously risks both with herd immunity and lockdown, a balance of risks, and trusting the media that you're hearing. And I was at the shop just now, and as I walked past the Independent front page today, COVID-19 spreading too fast to lift lockdown in England. Sage advisors warn amid warm weather will prompt public to flout the rules. And it looks like there's 3 scientists have come forward and said that lockdown's being eased too soon. But if that's your headline, then that's more fear, isn't it? And there's so much fear, and it's like, and confusion. There's fear and confusion, and I really feel that.
I woke up this morning, and the first thing is more or less I look on my mobile phone and I look at the news, and I saw this. I think it was on Sky News, but maybe other news channels as well. And there was these 2 scientists from the Sage group, warning of an early lockdown. And I thought as well, there was no argument provided in this article. So if you claim something like that it's too early, then you better be prepared to back it up with some really strong predictions and evidence for that. So I mean, this is also kind of interesting because it's sort of the end of the term right now at the university, and we examine our undergraduate students. They just basically wrote their final year projects, the bachelor thesis, and these are quite motivated undergraduate students. They're generally very good, and they write their reports. And when we sort of mark them and when we examine them in oral examinations and the viva, we basically, there are certain criteria, certain high standards we hold them up to. And, these are essentially, to make it brief, I mean, we have to show evidence for analytical thinking. This is sort of the standard scientific approach where you have a big problem and you apply the reductionistic perspective, where you may make a big problem and divide it into smaller problems so you can tackle them effectively, and you do one after the other in a systematic way. And there's also the second one is the synthetic abilities. You have to show evidence for that. And it just means you basically, take a bunch of different angles, different measurements, different data, different sources, and then you combine them, and you have to have you get a coherent story out of it in the end. And the last thing is essentially the critical ability. And this is what I essentially mean. So in a critical ability, you have to play devil's advocate yourself, and you have to see all angles of the problem, and you have to say, what is the limitations of my approach? What is the limitations of the data I used? Sort of what would I do next if I had more time? These kind of things. And we ask our students, our undergraduate students, to fulfill these high standards. But then if there's something really important happening in this world, then all of a sudden we sort of, buckle and just sort of give in and just sort of, follow one way and sort of groupthink. And this is, I'm personally astonished how quickly it all went in one direction and without any resistance, without any questioning. I just like the debate. I don't have all the answers, of course, and I just want to see, if there's one person saying this is super horrible and this is like the Spanish flu, then I would like to see a couple of other voices which say something different. And then this is
then how would the government convince everyone of lockdown? If the media had a balance, that's it. That's my question to you. If we didn't see it on the news that it was so important, you have to push that message. Otherwise, lockdown wouldn't have happened. People wouldn't have done it. Does that make sense? You would have had more protesting, like in Germany, I guess.
I mean, I'm not saying that the lockdowns in Germany were less severe. It was just slightly different because there are different areas in Germany, different states within Germany, which have their local rules, and there's some confusion about it. Bavaria is more strict than other places, let's say. But I mean, I'm just saying, if there's an open debate, then whatever comes out of this debate should then also inform the policy. And if the debate goes in a direction versus the lockdown should be maybe revisited after 2 weeks into the lockdown, because it looks like it was too severe, or there's some evidence now coming out that we are on the decline already, and that other countries like Sweden doing much better in that sense, then we should be revisited. And there's no need to have, of course, an open debate and then see some sort of consensus coming out. But then on the other hand, the government going completely in a different direction. Of course, this direction of the government then should effectively reflect whatever the debate is going on.
So, well, we need to trust. I mean, I don't know anything about science. I know about communications and I know about media. I have to trust Professor Neil Ferguson. I have to trust SAGE. I have to trust my government to make a difficult decision with a huge amount of data and a situation that's clearly changed. I mean, this is 10 weeks ago since that first projection report came out from Neil Ferguson, Professor Neil Ferguson. And now we're in a very situation, and it actually said we need to wait a few weeks and see where we're at. Well, we have now. And now we, unfortunately, maybe the media have whipped up this frenzy and anxiety and fear, and people are too scared to come out of lockdown. I mean, that's come across. So it's all about, I need to trust that those in power that I voted for are making the decisions in my best interest, our best interest. I've said before, I'm self-employed, a single parent. I'm struggling more than maybe somebody who's being paid and not working so much and having a nice time with their family. So of course I'm suffering more than others, but that doesn't mean that I should have herd immunity. It doesn't mean that's what's right for the country just because I'm suffering. You've got to think of the collective, haven't you? And our collective is represented by our government, who we voted for. I just want good media, that's all. Good balanced media.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, that's the whole point. I mean, the question is, why is the government doing it? I don't know. Why is the media doing it? I also don't know. I'm sure there are certain reasons there, but I don't want to speculate too much about it.
Just finally, because people will want to know, will you get into trouble with your employer here, Imperial College London, for your views?
I hope not. Yeah. No, I mean, I didn't really mean to go after Niels Ferguson. I mean, I basically what I just want to have is an open debate, and I just basically want to follow the scientific process we normally have. So, of course, the public might now wonder, why we have to have this debate. Isn't science either right or wrong? And that kind of thinking, of course, might be sort of, fueled by the success stories of science. You take Einstein's general relativity theory from over 100 years ago, and it was some sort of landmark work, and there's no questioning about it that it was correct, and it did fantastic things. of course, decades later, we realize what the impact of that was from, having GPS and all these things and gravitational waves. But but normally this doesn't work like that. Normally, what is happening is you write a paper and you have to, of course, be critical about what you're doing, and then you submit it for review. And then you have some people you don't normally know, and they don't, as you don't, these are anonymous people who are reviewing your paper, and they don't gain anything basically. They're sort of completely unbiased, or at least they have to show that they have no conflict of interest. It's of course very important. And then you assume they're very unbiased, and they assess it, and then you get the feedback and you revise your paper before it can be submitted. So, and this sort of discussion in science is normally done, sort of behind closed doors. You get your reports, you modify your paper, and no harm done. And but the public, of course, doesn't know about this really.
No.
This discussion, and now all of a sudden, people might think, there's this work, and this can't it be? This has to be either correct or wrong, and why it has to be there's a debate. But this is just a normal process in science, and now it's very public, and it makes it look very strange. But this should just happen, yeah. So that's all I basically want to do with this little interview. So this is all I want, and I think this is not really even controversial. That's what we normally do, and that's what we expect our students to do.
It's not controversial. Are you saying that we rushed too quickly? That there was too much power in the hands of too few?
I mean, I don't know how the SAGE group operates, and I don't know Neil Ferguson what he does and so on. Imperial College is 8,000 staff members. We have 4,000 campuses. We have 4 campuses, and across London, and we are also sort of affiliated with multiple hospitals and the Crick Institute, and it's a very exciting research environment. But of course I don't know every professor at Imperial College, especially. I think Neil Ferguson is at medicine, faculty of medicine, and I'm in fundamental science. So I have very little to do with this medicine. So I'm basically in fundamentals research, and I'm more wondering about what cells are doing, and using my physics and engineering approach to understand what cells are doing. And I normally don't work on pandemics or epidemics even. So
of course, and I appreciate you talking to me. And like you say, it's very, very interesting to see that you've been watching more of it's really the media you watch. It has an impact on your views on anything, really, doesn't it? 100%. And I know, obviously, the World Health Organization is very connected to Imperial College London.
Sure, some big large funded projects. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, Trump has now terminated his relationship with the WHO.
I don't have any funding from WHO, so I have a very small research budget because, as I said, I work in fundamental science and there's very little funding. So
and yeah. Dr. Nabarro is the WHO special convoy for COVID-19. He's at Imperial College London. But there is a very close link between Imperial College London and the WHO.
Because it might be the case, yeah. I mean, of course, I'm sure there are other links to other universities. I know there are a lot of links also to German, the Charité in Berlin and the Robert Koch Institute. So there's these big sort of scientific institutions which also advise the government in Germany. And of course, there are also these links with WHO. Of course, these are small amounts of money overall in terms of a budget of a university. But of course, the question is, if people can be influenced by having small amounts. I don't know. I don't have any of this kind of funding. So, yeah.
And just finally, just to ask, is Germany out of lockdown completely now?
I can't really even say this. I mean, they're basically getting out of lockdown. As I said, the different areas in Germany have different policies. I think they want to get out, and they're sometimes, from the federal government and sort of, interference, and essentially when the local areas want to do their own thing, which they normally would be allowed to do in the federal republic. But, there's a sort of debate going back and forth. But, even if there's now people coming out of lockdown, let's say in Bavaria, people now have to wear their face masks and, keep their distance to people, and restaurants also they're open now, I think. They're sort of at half capacity. And of course, this becomes all ridiculous. We can't control all the risks in life. And why would we now want to control this in a different way, how we control other things? I saw statistics said basically the risk under 65 to get seriously ill from COVID-19 is basically the same as being, injured heavily or killed by a car accident on your way to work. And, it doesn't mean now we don't drive anymore. And it doesn't mean, we're having a big motorcycle helmet in our car and the defibrillator next to us and stuff like that, or we don't drive anymore, or we don't fly anymore. We don't do these kind of things. So why do we behave differently now with this kind of thing? And the good thing actually is also that, we have a nice cutoff. People under 65 are very little at risk. This is very low percentages. And then above 65, of course, these risks get substantially higher, and we have to be careful about it, of course. But there's no reason, I think, or no severe reason now not to have the younger people go to school or university or go back to work. I don't see even the issue here, because you could protect your vulnerable people and the elderly without leading to the severe lockdown, which we probably have to pay for the next 10 years or whatever it is. I'm not an economist. So.
Well, I know for a fact we're going to look back in a year with some very different way, with a different perspective. And we'll look at, I think in the media are going to have to answer some very hard questions of themselves as well during this, when we look back and see what decisions we made, whether they were the right ones and the impact of those decisions. So I'll finish the interview now, and I just want to thank you again. Please do feel free to come back on the channel and talk to me. And I really do appreciate you getting in touch and saying thanks for the work. And I would invite anyone else like yourself who wants to contribute to the debate to get in touch with me, and they can come on the channel, because I think there is a desperate thirst and need for this kind of conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish?
No, it was, thank you for having me on the channel. Yeah, thank you very much.
And thank you for being on it. You take care.
Thank you.
Speak to you soon. Bye.